So my mom called me this morning, and like many of my friends who have family and relatives overseas, she wanted to know what's going on in Hong Kong, how I'm doing, and am I safe? And most importantly, when am I going to leave Hong Kong and move back to the States? And she's been doing this ever since I moved here in 1988, after Tiananmen in 89, before the handover in 97, SARS in 2003, 2014 with the umbrella movement, and pretty much all the time. And then she'll resignedly say, like, I guess you're just never going to leave Hong Kong. And so because I've been here this long, I thought it would be good to jump on and do a quick cultural conversation with you guys about what's been happening in Hong Kong since, well, Sunday was the big march from Victoria Park in Causeway Bay all the way down Hennessy Road to Central. And that happened on Sunday. There were, as organizers say, there was like 1 million people that marched, and it was very peaceful until the late hours until around midnight, 11:30, 12, when there was some violent protests, clashes at that time. But the march itself was peaceful. I had friends that went. I did not go, and it was for the most part peaceful. They are protesting against the government's desire to push through this extradition bill. That means that people in Hong Kong could be extradited to a lot of different places that weren't currently on the extradition list, but that mainland China is now one of them. And so of course Hong Kong people see this as scary, because then their worst case scenario is that for any offense they could be sent back to the mainland to face charges. Drummed up charges could then, if they do the littlest thing wrong, they could be sent to mainland China to face charges. And a little bit of that, I think, is, you could say it's blown out of proportion, because they will be tried in Hong Kong first, and that there are rules in place, and all that. If you hear that noise, can you hear that noise? That's actually rain. It's been raining here nonstop, and it's been really heavy and really hard thunderstorms. Today around 5-6 o'clock, it was as dark as 10 o'clock at night with rain. So that's what you're hearing outside. Right now it is Thursday night, the 13th of July, and it is nearly 12 o'clock midnight. So that's what you're hearing. Okay, so back to this whole thing. So you could say it's blown out of proportion, but the problem is that the mainland government doesn't have the best track record when it comes to a lot of their there's not a lot of trust with the mainland Chinese government. However, having said that, this whole extradition thing did not come about from China coming down and saying, you've got to talk about this extradition bill and we need to push this through right away. It is because of that young guy who went to Taiwan and murdered his girlfriend, and they are unable to extradite him back to Taiwan to face charges because there's no agreement in place. And so that's where it all stemmed from, and they're trying to push it through as fast as possible, which of course is a cause for concern. Have they debated it long enough? Have they thought about all the consequences? Have they this, that, and the other? And it doesn't help that the current chief executive, Carrie Lam, is she doesn't speak with a lot of warmth towards Hong Kong people. And even though she was on TV, it's gotten so crazy that she was on TV the other night in tears, basically having to defend her love of Hong Kong and question why people are thinking that she's betraying them. So it's all gotten a little bit crazy crazy emotional in the last couple days, and with the protests yesterday turning quite violent, and that's probably what you've been seeing on the news, because they're trying to prevent LegCo from getting together to debate this bill and pass it through, which was supposed to happen today. And now the latest I've heard is that it's been postponed. The meeting has been postponed until in a later time. I don't think they know when that is yet. So there's more to come on this. And it's been interesting to be here because, if I had to say the saddest thing is the people feeling like the government doesn't care about them. There's nothing worse than feeling like you're living in a place where your government is selling you out all the time and just not listening to what the people want, and instead just basically doing what's best for themselves and what's best for Beijing. But on the other hand, you could look at it as if this is no surprise that Hong Kong is part of China. I know that there's an excellent article in the SCMP about a Hong Kong student who wrote an article in the last day, maybe even today, from Boston College, who says that I'm from Hong Kong, I'm not part of China. I'm from a city where I don't recognize the government that has, not that they don't recognize, you have to just take a look at scmp.com or look up the Boston College Hong Kong girl that wrote this article. And I think that that is a huge part of the problem, is that a lot of these young people were born after 97 or in the 90s when they were like maybe, even if they were born in 1990, they were 7 years old during the handover or at the time of the handover. And so what they know, they don't really know anything else except this uncertainty. So it's like being born into this complete uncertain time. You don't know what's happening from one day to the next. Things are changing all the time. Whereas people like that are older, that had the perspective to know that this is going to happen, that you can't, it's just a fantasy to think that Hong Kong is going to be its own autonomous country, city, state, or whatever you'd like to think of it as. It is part of China. I mean, Hong Kong, you only have to look at this whole Greater Bay Area initiative. When I heard about that, it was just like, no, because the Greater Bay Area is basically Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Macau. Can you hear the thunder? Hong Kong, Guangdong province, Guangzhou, and Macau. And it's basically forming this Greater Bay Area where Hong Kong has even now been demoted further into just one little part of this Greater Bay Area. So it's I think that's extremely sad, the way that this has all been handled since the handover, because they could have done a much better job with educating these young people into what it means. But instead you had the national anthem, that whole thing there where people weren't standing for it, and then they pass a law which says you're going to be it's against the law to do all of that kind of thing. And they've stoked a lot of emotions where if they would have done a better job communicating and a better job of taking care of the people and making them feel as if they're being taken care of. Because I think that was a big hallmark of the time under the British. The British took care of the citizens. They provided for them. They were almost like that father figure that took care of the general population. It wasn't perfect, I'm sure. I mean, I was only in Hong Kong since the bill was, I think it was 86 that Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping got together and signed off the whole thing that Hong Kong would be going back to China. So I've only been here since then. So I don't even have perspective before that, but from what I understood was that the British government, it was almost like that father figure. They took care of the local people, and they knew it was happening. They knew it was rule of law. They knew they had stability. And now it's just uncertainty all the time. Everything's uncertain since 97. The only certain thing is that we are going back to China. We are part of China. Hong Kong is part of China. And for people to say that it's not, they're kind of living in a fantasy. Wow, the rain is really hard again. It's been like this for days. So that's pretty much what I see as the saddest thing, is that instead of focusing on Hong Kong and doing what we can, even if the government doesn't realize how special we are, Hong Kong is. Hong Kong people should if they want that, in my mind, as an outsider kind of looking in, is if they want that specialness, it has to come from them. If they're looking for the government to provide that feeling of Hong Kong being special, they're never going to get it, because the government is there to basically bridge that gap between the mainland and Hong Kong. They're not looking to the Hong Kong people to, as a government would, like a government by the people for the people, because they're not. They're elected by Beijing, basically. And so it's no surprise that then their loyalty is going to lie with Beijing. So it's just so many different pieces to this puzzle. And it's what I find the most sad is obviously the education system in Hong Kong. the demotion of Hong Kong to being just part of the Greater Bay Area and to being nothing more than a Chinese city. I just think that it's the reality. It's always better to work with what the reality is instead of what you want to be true. And a lot of people want Hong Kong to be its own autonomous place. They want to get support from the West that it's going to be able to survive on its own. But one only has to look at the fact that we get our water from China, that they're just so intricately linked. There's no way Hong Kong is ever going to be its own complete autonomous place that China is just going to say, sure, no problem, be independent. That is not going to happen. And I think that the education of the young people, to not give them more of a sense of certainty and more of a sense of security, was a big mistake on the part of the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government. On the Hong Kong people's part, they could do a lot more themselves, I think, they do have choices. They do have the power to make Hong Kong the special place that it is. And I think it's very sad that if we lose the fact that Hong Kong people just get on with it. That's what I love about Hong Kong. They just get on with it. They've always been able to roll with the punches, roll with it, just take what comes and get on with it. And now it's more like demanding children, kind of like demanding this be done, demanding that be done, throwing, getting angry, getting violent, leaving piles of rubbish behind. It's just, that's what makes me sad. So I hope that this little talk was helpful and shed some light into what it's like to be in Hong Kong. I can tell you that although I didn't go down to the protests or the march, just as a different perspective, I'm about a mile, maybe less, than from where all this is happening. And on Wednesday night is racing in Hong Kong, and usually in Happy Valley. But on this Wednesday night, yesterday night, it was taking place out in Sha Tin, which is in the New Territories. It's far removed. Sha Tin Racecourse is a big cavernous place on a night, at night. And so it's not a very fun place to go. But they still opened the track for cross betting, and people were there betting on the horses. I went down to the track. Inside the track, there's lots of pitches, like rugby pitches, field hockey, soccer fields. And I went down there for a run, and life was going on as usual. People were down there. There's a big rugby tournament going on. There was a field hockey, I think, tournament down there, and lots of soccer games. People were out running and exercising. So it's not as if the whole of Hong Kong is in upheaval. A lot of people are just, as I said, getting on with it, dealing with what comes, and doing what Hong Kong people do best, and that is persevering, working hard, getting on with it. All right, so I hope that was an insightful little insight into what's been going on. It's really late here. I'm starting to repeat myself. I apologize. It is after midnight here, so now technically it is Friday in Hong Kong, and I wish you all a very good day wherever you are, or a good night, and thank you for joining me and listening to my little cultural conversation. Bye.